I did not bear a son to be killed. I mean, I don't think any mother does around the world. No Russian mother, no Ukraine, no Israeli, nobody. Women don't want war. Just having come back from Davos, you realize what were the two themes that were really mostly discussed. It was war and the elections. And that's why I really think that we should get a woman in Dutch politics as a prime minister, and in every country, they are not gonna send these countries to war. If you have a board, if you have 2 or 3 women in that board, these women are already making a huge statement and difference. We don't really always need gender equality in order to be able to make our statement. I'm much more focused always on, use the inequalities of men and women. Women are second-rate citizens in the Netherlands. Having a lot of children in the Netherlands is a status symbol. Men like to give money to men. Only 2% of funding is going to women. I think men are absolutely part of the solution.
Your most mind-altering hour of the week. Hi, you're listening to Shift Happens, and I'm your host, Ina.
Whether you're a man or a woman, gender equality is going to affect you at one point or another, because it's affecting 50% of our entire human race. And whether you're a man or a woman, we don't have the answers. What is it exactly? How do we talk about it? What can I do to support? How is it impacting our human race? Whether you're a father to a daughter, how do you empower her? If you are a husband, how do you support your wife? If you are a father to a son, how do you prepare him for these subjects? The topic of equality has exploded in public conversation, thankfully. But we still have so many unanswered questions, and that's why I'm so privileged to have a leading voice on women empowerment worldwide here in my studio today. And look, I know you're tired of this talk of empowerment and equality, and I know you've heard it again and again. But I promise you that if you are watching this until the end, we are going to tell this story in a different way than you've ever heard it before. And if you're a man and you clicked on this link, or you were forwarded this link, then I implore you, please listen, because we need you. My guest today, Carine de Meyere, is an advocate for women's rights, founder of Women of the World, a chief tribal builder for women entrepreneurs, has recently been chosen as one of the most inspiring leaders in the world and one of the top 100 women in tech, and is the starter of a silent revolution on making the unconscious gender bias conscious. Carine, welcome.
Thank you.
Why do you do what you do?
I'm somebody who very much lives from within. And even though I actually was not very much raised as a girl's girl, I was actually more of a tomboy who climbing trees and played with toys. And I think I was everything but the girl. I think what really changed my perspective on life is that I saw the way my mother, being half Norwegian, how she was living the role model life of having lots of children and living, outside Amsterdam, even though I was born in the city, in a big house. And, it was very much about my father's career. She was an amazing support to him. But I did always look towards my father. And in a way, I think I'm forever grateful for him to see when I was age 15 and we were traveling the United States that he said, "You are too big for the Netherlands. How about you go and study in America?" And which I did, and I ended up going to women's college, Wells College. At that time, the women's college of Cornell University in upstate New York, outside of Ithaca. And I have an older sister. However, when I was younger, I think unconsciously there was a lot of competition between us, even though I love her dearly. And she's my best friend, and she was witness to my wedding. And she's, I think, the closest to our son besides me. When you're young, you have that sibling rivalry. And I think what I learned at Wells College is, I think my best friend is still from there. She's also godmother to our son. And I really learned to see women not so much as competition, but mere as sisters. So I think the feeling of sisterhood is really something that I learned at a women's college. And it's a unique concept because, in Europe, you have boarding schools in England, which are all girls, but not age 18 to 22. And I think those are very formative years. And so as we were all being, prepared to go into the business world, I felt I had 500 sisters. And I'm actually still in touch with many of them, even though there was no internet to stay in touch, I graduated at the end of the 80s, and then because I was unable to stay there longer than another year, which is actually the same now. It was the Reagan years, and the Dutch guilder was enormously high towards the dollar. So I came back to Europe, but with a completely different mindset than most women, I think, my age.
What made the difference, you think?
Well, to be quite honest, I remember when I graduated and we had the daughter of Desmond Tutu and our president, and they gave a conjunction speech, and they said, we hope that we prepared you for all the changes which are going to come, rapidly. Especially already, I learned how to code in the 1980s, but because I was educated in America. And so, the Microsoft and Apple, they were all tested, and we had a pretty big endowment for a small college, women's college. So we had computers already in the 1980s. So when I came back to the Netherlands, I had a completely different mindset. However, what I noticed is that women really had to fight for their spot in the business world. Whereas I really felt that in America, all of my friends, they were, parachuted into great jobs in Boston and New York and Philadelphia and what you name it. And that was not the case in Europe. Yeah, and then, I entered the workforce, I did a lot of things before I actually, wanted to actually become an entrepreneur because, you need to learn the ropes. So, my first job was with Ogilvy Mather. I worked with okay, this is the moment because, after 14, 15 years in the workforce, I think I had a pretty good view of what gender equality, meant. And I really wanted to take a closer look at it. So I really spent 2 years at Harvard researching it. I wrote a thesis about it. And it's interesting, we were talking about it this morning. You were talking about gender equality. I learned from Richard Hackman, and may God have his soul because he passed away, unfortunately. But I remember taking his course at Harvard, and he said he had done research that if you have a board, and you have, let's say you've got 7 people, if you have 2 or 3 women in that board, these women are already making a huge statement and difference. And so we don't really always need gender equality in order to be able to make our statement. I'm much more focused always on, use the unique qualities of men and women. And even though I've focused very much with women of the world on, advancing women and making them more visible, and I just shared with you that wonderful post of that young woman that I was able to support to organize a peace walk in Davos. Well, we all know Davos is a very male-oriented.
Which is where you just came from this week.
Absolutely. However, we were there with women of the world, of course, but also with a movement that I started 2 years ago after I had attended COP in Glasgow, COP26. And I realized that innovation and actually financing to innovation in the climate space was not going fast enough, but also that a lot of people were not aware of what they were doing. And I always think you need to connect consciousness and information in order to accelerate the process. So I created the Hurry Up Club because we're not going fast enough.
And that's what I love about your narrative, raising the consciousness, raising the energy, and all is love. I mean, those are my taglines. I love them so much. And we always start the podcast with a question from a previous interview or a previous speaker who we had on our podcast. And in this case, I want to make an exception. And the reason for that is having seen your interview on Doorzetters with Ruud Hendricks.
Hoe lang duurt het nog voor vrouwen echt gelijkwaardig zijn aan mannen in Nederland? We hebben het even niet over de rest van de wereld, want dat is een ander verhaal. Maar hoe lang duurt het voor vrouwen net zo invloedrijk zijn, net zoveel te vertellen hebben als mannen?
Ja, maar dan moet het hele sociale systeem hier vooral.
Maar dat is niet het antwoord. Ik wil weten wanneer. Hoe lang duurt het nog?
The way he asks the question kind of speaks more to the problem than it speaks to the solution. Rather than looking within, we're pointing the finger, right? I like to give people the benefit of the doubt, just like yourself. And I want to see that he has good intentions with his question, right? And I do believe that we can give him a definitive answer in numbers. And we're going to do so at the end of the podcast. So keep watching because it's coming. Also Ruth, by the way. But my question is, are men part of the solution? And if so, what can they do? If they're not asking the question themselves, I want to ask it on their behalf. What can we do?
I think men are absolutely part of the solution. My 2 co-founders are men. Mark Jankovic, CEO and founder of Delphus, and George van Sonsbeek. And it was the 3 of us that were together in Glasgow. And we had a natural... sometimes you have that with people. I mean, maybe because I was more of a tomboy. For me, men are just like girls. So they're just friends, guy friends. I've had a lot of guy friends all my life. Sometimes I like to actually be around guys better than women because sometimes women can be very catty or they can be very, they have this queen bee syndrome. Yeah, no, but I mean, I think some women in the Netherlands, I mean, I can make a whole list of it and I'm not going to name them, but it's all about them. And I sometimes wish for them that they would have been at a women's college like me. And then they realize it's not only about you, it's about the collective us, the way men do. So, men, in a way, they figure out very, very quickly, okay, who's the leader of us? Okay, well, then we are going to stand behind him and we're going to make sure that he goes forward. Women don't do that. I was publicly so disappointed with a lot of women when they were not standing behind Sigrid Kaag. It's exactly what happened with Hillary Clinton in the United States. It got a little better recently with the VVD, with Dylan. On the other hand, I think the VVD, had run its course, to be quite honest. And I think I was totally surprised that people were so surprised that Geert Wilders won. Because I'm like, if you're tuned in to the undercurrent, it was obvious that this was going to happen.
Silent revolutions that you're talking
Absolutely.
about. Right? I am wondering what would happen if we started a Me Too campaign on all the women who have been victimized, not by men, by the women themselves.
Exactly. Well, I know lots of examples of that.
Yeah, 7 years ago, I spoke to 3 different women who were on the same mission as you, with the same big heart and the same commitment to support women and to help us, and using kind of similar tools also, so technology, funding, and networking. And after a while, they just they were powerful women, beautiful women, with good intentions. They all seem to go under the radar. And I'm wondering, are women just a tougher nut to crack? Are we more hard to activate? What's happening?
How do you mean under the radar?
So the activism stopped being a story that they talk about. They're no longer, and they're now working, actually co-founding organizations and companies with men mostly, who are male-oriented. So at some point, there's some kind of disappointment going on in their career that they decide, I'm not going to be able to give enough influence here.
Well, I mean, I don't think I'll ever stop being an activist. I think I had the example of a grandmother. I think she lived until 99. And I think I'm very much modeled after her subconsciously. Even my father said that when he saw me lying in the crib, he's like, "Oh my God, I think you're like my mother." But she was 35 when she got married. She was a good tennis player. I used to be a very good tennis player. There are a lot of things of similarities. I did notice that despite, being some women's activists and everything, you sometimes do need men. So with this Hurry Up Club now, we have 225 members, 200 women, but 25 are men. But I choose the men very carefully. I'm the administrator of the group. I really look if all women are participating. If the women in the group who are only taking and not giving, I delete them from the group. And if they ask me why, then I explain it to him. Because I am coming to, somebody asked me Friday night at dinner, what is the word that you take away from Davos? And I said, well, we have another 6 years until we've reached, the time frame for the SDGs, the 17 Sustainability Development Goals. Well, in September, I think the first numbers were out that I think we're only 15% of the 100%. So, it's obvious that we're not going to reach that. Yeah. We have, we've had 2 wars, the Russian-Ukraine war, horrible what's happening in Israel and Gaza. I think at this moment, there are 25 conflicts around the world. We've got 4 billion people going to the election, casting vote. There's going to be a lot of focus on misinformation and everything. And I'm like, wow, women should really, women should absolutely support each other, but we need men to also accelerate the process. And so, I think what my natural talent is, I can pivot very quickly. I have a quick mind. Last weekend, I was actually, somebody thought I was 10 years younger than I am. I said, okay, well, that's probably the energy that I radiate. But the term that really stuck with me in Davos was planetary boundaries. And I think that's where we're heading. And that also means that people need to start taking responsibility for their own way of living. If you have to travel, even Jane Goodall, who is my ultimate role model, she's 90 years old, born on the same day as my father, 3rd of April. She even said last week, she said, I have a roots and shoots education program for younger children around the world to talk, to share with them about how they should incorporate nature into their work, into their studies, in their leadership. She says, I say to leaders, if you do not understand the rules and laws of nature and climate, you're actually not fit to be a leader. She said, I know that I fly planes around the world, but she said, but I'm not the only one, but I compensate everything I do. And she kept on using the term planetary boundaries. And I'm literally saying to all people who are listening now, start incorporating that word into your own vocabulary because, like the UN can, first they had the Millennium Goals, then they had the SDGs. But in 2030, you have a Saudi Arabia, and I want to talk about that as well because I'm actually organizing a female leadership trip there early May, and I'm really inviting women to join me, and men actually as well, but first of all women, because I want you to see what I saw when I came there for the first time. There's not one country in the world which is developing so quickly as Saudi Arabia. Even now, I think people are unaware, but when I attended LEAP last year, which is a big technology conference, 175,000 people, and I was one of the speakers there, I met so many young, inspiring Saudi Arabian women who had all been educated in England, in the United States, and other places, who had all come back because they want to be part of the Vision 2030. That Mohammed bin Salman, of course, I'm not blind to the past, and I know things have happened, but that country is developing so quickly, and they have no time to actually create a glass ceiling. They want these young women to be part of it. And these women feel much more seen there than they feel in England or in America or in other parts of the world. So I think, use my female leadership trips to educate yourself, to step out of your comfort zone, because I think that way you can also make a difference in your own country and also be a beacon of hope and a North Star for younger women.
Yeah, I believe this was also a USP that I noticed in the way you were operating things versus the females that I mentioned before. And that is that you were not saying, okay, when we're speaking about learn from the role models who have paved the way in that sense. So, and then one of the important indicators that will tell us whether we are hitting the KPIs with respect to the targets related to equality, then we are needing to look at the proportion of men versus women that are starting up or that are going into business. And this is your playing field. You are working hard, but you are not working alone on raising these rates, right? So because like we spoke before, you're working on 3 pillars: funding, technology, networking, and there are various alliances across sectors that are doing the same. So we have, for example, Dell led alliance DWEN network that is kind of breaking the barriers towards technology. Then we have CodeV, an ABN-led alliance that is breaking the barriers towards funding. Then we have TED Women, who are breaking the barriers in networking and teaching skills. And we've noticed a really growth, a big spurt with respect to how many people are starting up companies in the Netherlands. So according to the Chamber of Commerce, in the past 10 years, 62% more, there's a 62% increase in the startups. However, when we're looking at the rates related to the proportion of men versus women, they have not moved almost at all. And then my question is, why is that happening? Do you have an idea?
Forbes, I mean, as you mentioned, Forbes just wrote about my efforts, because I've been going to Davos for 15 years. And this year really was the first time, I think, that we saw with Women of the World, but also through the Hurry Up Club and also through many, many other women's efforts, that there was an enormous increase of women. And as I mentioned before, Richard Hackman said, if you have 1/3 of women in a board or at a conference, they're already making a huge impact. And so WEF, the World Economic Forum, had this year 28% female participation within the forum.
Are these women who are in leadership positions? So is it a glass ceiling breaking, or are we talking about women who have started a business?
No. These are like real leadership. Yeah, this is all leadership. These are all role models. And what I did with the Hurry Up Club together with Mark and Joff is that we brought many of these women together within that. So, like Sandrine Dixon de Clève, the co-director of the Club of Rome, or Leslie Johnson, CEO of the Loudest Foundation, so it's women like that who are very much surrounded by men. And by connecting these women, it was also the foundation for my female leadership trips, because I used to do the global partnerships, for TED Women here in Amsterdam. And what I noticed, when I was actually striking all these partnership deals, very often these women were the only woman in the board, like, Caroline Prinsen within ABN AMRO, or Melissa Rucksack at Deloitte, or Cara Antoine at Microsoft. And what I tried to do with this first female leadership trip in 2018, to bring all these women together on one trip, go to Silicon Valley. I call them the future of technology trips, because I wanted them to see what was happening within the technology, and then to be able to go back to their organizations, because unfortunately women have to prove themselves more than men. And I'm going back to Forbes now, because they actually just made a statement. They have the Forbes 30 under 30, but they also have the Forbes 50 over 50. And at this moment, 80% of women, which are top CEOs, are above 50. And one of their slogans is, and I so love it because it's exactly how I see my own life. They also say, we should start getting used to the pauses or the pivots of women, because in the end, they come out on the same level, but they want to be a good mother too. I wanted to be there for our son. Yeah. I did not want him to be a child that would come home at 3 PM from school, because, like the Dutch school system is very old fashioned still. They really expect mothers to when I came back in 2006 from Cambridge, I was expected to pick up our son at 12 and bring him back at 1:15. Whereas in America, when he went to school, he went from school to 9 to 6. It was a fun thing in the morning, to make his little lunchbox together. There was always a little treat in there. He had a story to tell us at the end of the day. We had a story to tell. In the Netherlands, I've actually spoken to our Prime Minister about this, and lots of other people in the politics as well. We are not moving with the developments of life. Look at other countries, France, America, Germany, Norway, the Nordics. Me with my Norwegian background. In 1987, Norway already had the quota. They had a prime minister and said, women and men, we should treat them equal. let's have men take care of the child for 6 months, and things like that. We still don't have that.
No. And they say that 40% of women who state that the main reasons they are reluctant to start up a business is because they are feeling financially insecure. And then we're very quick to make the conclusion that it's about their risk appetite. So we start to work on managing their risk appetite and increasing it. However, I believe that women are biologically inclined to seek more safety for the right reasons because, well, we would not survive as well under a bridge as a man would. And we have the offspring to take care of. Yeah. And I love your narrative on, hey, let's do something on the social fabric. Let's do something with the childcare system. I've just had my baby a year ago. And I'm very proud to have had her, and I'm extremely happy that this has taken place, and I feel that it's a contribution to the human race, right? However, having worked as a self-employed and trying to bootstrap my way through my own business, that means that I had to take a lot of steps back in the past year. That means somewhere roughly 300,000 euros a year. And right now I'm still looking into how will I start up, where will I go back, and we are having to look at the maternity penalty. Women that have to return back usually face a 60% decrease in their income when they return back after having decided to be a mother. So that's one thing that we're looking at. Then at the same time, we have the equality narrative, right? And my husband in the past year has been promoted. Great. He has an increase in salary. Great. But that also means that he's working more hours, right? So, which means the load falls heavier again back on my shoulders. Great. I am all to support men and be the silent force behind the men and their success. However, the equality narrative is where we are getting bitten in our bums for actually trying to be that silent force behind the men's success. Because it's now the 50-50 narrative that comes into play, right? I mean, is anybody asking me where do you get 3,500 euro a month to sustain half of the household? And to which I don't have an answer, right? Nobody's asking me that question. But I do have to live up to the claims of equality, right? Because the narrative is 50-50, so I have to support and sustain the family with the 50-50. Why are we pointing the finger at the individual and trying to let the individual solve the problem that is a social fabric problem? And I'm not asking you, it's a rhetorical question.
Yeah. Right? Well, it's interesting. I remember I think it was 2000, and I just returned from the years we were living in Cambridge. And I was invited to a women's dinner in The Hague. And Ayaan Hirsi Ali was there. I'm not sure if you remember her, but she was from Somalia, and she had quite an impact on the Netherlands. Also quite a lot of impact on me. And I was sitting in between her and Mark Rutte, who at that time was still Secretary of State for Education. He became Prime Minister the following year. And I remember that Ayaan and I were talking about, I was telling her about my women's studies at Harvard. And she said, Carine, it's very interesting. She said, women are second-rate citizens in the Netherlands. She said, I looked at the Constitution, and she literally voiced what I had studied, that having a lot of children in the Netherlands is a status symbol. And the Netherlands was still, living on the gas bubble, as we were saying. That, you can really have quite a nice life with just one salary. So there was no need to have childcare, as part of the government, policies or whatever, because, a stay-at-home mom was the best for a child. And I remember that at that time, I was still giving a bad feeling, even by some of the mothers in school, if I was working too much. And I remember saying to her, I said, you are confirming everything that I just studied for 2 years, And that I am experiencing right now. Well, she left the Netherlands and then she moved to Cambridge because she married Niall Ferguson. And now she's living in Palo Alto with Niall. And she's got 2 children and everything. And I'm certain she'll probably have much more childcare or whatever, help with her 2 boys than I was having at that time in the Netherlands. Yeah, so it's true.
I was raised in the Soviet Union. And if anything, that for 12 years being brought up in that system has taught me to have an X-ray vision for things that are decaying from within. And actually add to the 20 years of my change management experience working in global transformations, KPMG, ING, IKEA. This kind of gives me a little bit of a helicopter view on the whole situation. And if I look at it from that perspective, what I see is another change program, which is, gender equality is a change, it's a global transformation, that like all other change programs, 70% of all change programs fail. And the reason of that is actually rather simple, but also very, very complex in and of itself. And that is that we first of all are not on the same page, all of us, and second of all, we don't even agree with what's on that page to begin with, right? So this narrative of equality means longer lines in public toilets. The narrative on equality means a future generation that is going to be troubled and traumatized. It means increased burnout rates. It means so many things which are saying we're shooting ourselves in the foot, that we are digging our own grave. Maybe that's a bit dramatic, but that we are actually working against our own selves as women with that. And I believe that we had good intentions. We wanted to write our own anthem, and in the end, we're kind of writing our swan song, And shit happens. It's time to stop and say, well, okay, maybe we made a mistake. Let's rewrite that narrative.
Yeah.
And let's speak about equity versus equality.
Totally. I totally agree with you on that one. Yeah.
Imagine you went to the dragon's den and was Peter Schoenen, and he asked you, hey, Carine, what is your revenue model? And you'd say, I plead for equality. I want everybody to come out equal from this. He would say, well, wrong show. You're the weakest link, right? I mean, they would never fund you.
What I really would hope for Dutch education is that they would really invest more time at an early age for boys and girls to learn how to pitch, to learn how to just tell a story. Because when I was an entrepreneur, and I came back from the United States in 2006 with a business plan to create the first interactive children's museum in the Netherlands. And it was going to be on the interface of education and technology, because already at that time, I had very, very dear friends who had founded the Media Lab. And, I just saw that, you can accelerate and you can have when you connect education through technology, I think at least it will make you much more equitable, for the workforce as well. Anyway, and that's when I also noticed that every time when I was pitching, I had been able to learn that because I was very much educated in America. But I noticed with many of these pitching contests, and also later when I was part of TED Women in Amsterdam and we had the Startup Award, 70% of women were just lousy pitchers. They had good ideas. Yeah. But if you cannot convince an investor, then he's never going to invest in you. And unfortunately, 100% of the investors were men at that time. It's getting better now, 20 years later. But at that time, I don't think I ever sat across a woman. Men like to give money to men. Yeah. And I'm very much focusing on, on women, having more women in the financial sector, in the private equity and venture capital. Luckily, there are more women in the VC world, than in the private equity world. That's still very much male dominated. But, if you look at the global numbers, I think we're still only 2% of funding is going to women.
Wow.
That's really, and that has not increased. Yeah. COVID has actually made it worse. Yeah. And that's really something that I want to investigate the next couple of years. How we can increase that number.
Some of it is due to the gender, this bias that you were trying to bring to the surface and make us aware of. Thankfully so. But some of it is also a choice, like the OECD, the Organization for Economical Cooperation and Development in Europe. They did this research, and in the study came out that 70% of women who are starting a business, they will always choose to self-fund. Then we have 20% they will choose for a bank loan, and 10% will choose for getting funding, external funding from an investor. And now, well, you're mentioning that only 2% are actually making it through the investors' eyes. And I've watched the Dragon's Den, and I've seen how critical they are of women, and I've seen how hard it is for women to actually really tell the same story as the men are doing. And I'm not saying that men are not doing a better job. I have to say they are doing a better job at pitching themselves. I agree with you completely. But what would be your advice to the poor women who are bootstrapping like me, who are paying everything themselves, who are, starting up a business, and it's many of them, right? 70% of all the women, and that's 24,000 startups every year who are bootstrapping, female startups who are bootstrapping in the Netherlands. What's your advice to them? Is that stupid, or is that wise, or?
Well, to be quite honest, I think men are better bluffers. During our first trip to Silicon Valley, we visited LinkedIn. They're actually one of our partners on these trips. And I remember there was a woman from the strategy and the D&I department, and she gave a presentation on how a man's career develops and a woman's career. And she said that a woman has until age 30 to really prove herself, whether she's partner ready or investor ready, because of the childbearing age, Men have until age 40. So men can be much more relaxed in a way. On the other hand, I mean, for men, it's their only journey in life and their identity is very much on what they do. And I see it actually with a lot of men around me too. Women can have multiple hats. So I think maybe sometimes, we should not only blame the man, but it also has to do with the lack of urgency for women. I see a lot of women my age who look at me thinking, why are you doing all these things? Why don't you go play golf? Or why don't you go to a detox retreat in Thailand, which I see a lot of them do. And, or play bridge or whatever, all these things. I'm like, well, I'll do those things when I'm in my 80s and I really can't do all the other things anymore, although I hope I'll be able to, to be alive until I might dig 90s or 100. Somebody said yesterday, if you stay alive, if you stay healthy the next 10 years, in 10 years' time, AI will be able to solve everything and you'll be able to become 140. I think it was actually Ruud Hendricks who said that. I'm like, oh my God, I don't know if I want to turn 140. But, it is a nice perspective. But I think that what I do see, because I have an amazing British entrepreneur that I actually invested in myself, Sophie Smith. She's the founder of NAPTA Health. Hello, Sophie. She's really one of my rock stars, but I think for many people. And she's trying to change the healthcare, and she's actually trying to make it more accessible in the UAE, but also in Saudi Arabia and for Northern Africa. I know she's going to be amazing successful. Bill Gates has just showed interest in investing her. Chelsea Clinton visited her clinic, and I was actually there during COP28. We had a wonderful session there. But she's often tells us about the tough journey that she had to go, in order to get her money. She just raised 5 million. Sometimes she brought a man along, which is what I did with my children's museum. I sometimes brought one of my board members along if I knew that was going to help me raise the money.
There's nothing wrong with that, right?
And there's nothing wrong with that.
It's the only way forward, actually.
Exactly. You need to strategize. And I was so focused on getting that children's museum that I didn't really matter. One advice my mentor gave me from America said, always look careful at the funders. Don't let them greenwash. So don't let them, maybe sometimes they earn their money with bad practices and then they want to use your beautiful initiative. So that was one thing I was very much focused on. But anyway, and Sophie Smith did the same and she's been extremely successful. And so she's smart and she wants to be successful. And I think then that's going to happen too. I sometimes think that maybe women are spoiled, to be quite honest, in the Netherlands. I think women are very spoiled.
In what way?
Maybe it's the women that I'm surrounded by, but I think some of them are extremely spoiled and they don't, sometimes I see the best things happen when women actually go through a divorce. So they've been a little bit, spoiled and a bit laid back and not felt the urgency. And all of a sudden, when their social status, changes, they all of a sudden become much more driven and ambitious.
I have another theory there, and it's related to something you mentioned about your mother being the silent force behind your father, my mother being the silent force behind my father. Same story, and my father became a very successful politician back in Moldova and the mayor of the city, all thanks to her. She was working 2 shifts, and I believe that, they divorced, and I believe that as soon as they divorce, the focus, the energy gets rechanneled somewhere else other than on the men who, hey, is it a coincidence that they become successful during the married years?
No, I totally agree with you.
So maybe
I sometimes always thought that my mother was much smarter than my father. However, she was half English, half Norwegian. So, she was not at all Dutch, and she was very much raised with the Victorian age principles. I studied women's literature when I was at Wells. So I very much wanted to understand why my mother was the woman she was, and how she had, wanted to make herself, the second role in that. But I must say, my father had a heart attack when he was 50, so I was age 12, and if it wasn't for my mother, I don't think my father would have made it to 88. So, I've only learned to respect her more. I unconditionally loved her very much, and I think, she's one of the reasons why I have so much love for a lot of things. Because, and she's also taught me, to be grateful for a lot of things, because, you do not choose where you're born. And why I very much like to be interviewed by you now is that when I did the launch for Women in Tech in the Netherlands in June 2019, we had a standing room. It was 300 women showed up, and it was boiling hot. I remember it was at Elsevier's head office. There was no opportunity to open a window. But I think 80% of the attendees were from Eastern Europe. And there were very few Dutch women. And it's interesting because I just read to you that response I just had on LinkedIn from Yip. But then also I shared with you the article in Forbes, and there's been a lot of response to that article. And one woman this morning said, I do not agree with what Forbes said, because I'm a woman in tech, and it's still the case that, young women enter the workforce in the Western world, but in the technology sector, but after 5 years, they often leave because they feel so unwelcome. And this is still happening. Yeah. Whereas the women in Eastern Europe were actually the ones who did not feel that at all. And so that's all stems from the communist time period, that women and men were equally educated. The children went to good schools and everything. Whereas I think that the Western world can learn a lot from actually. Yeah. So there were also good things.
2/3 of women, they do not believe that they have entrepreneurial skills. You mentioned something about pitching, and you mentioned something about their confidence levels. And here's where yourself and the 200 women that you carry in your pockets and bring them with you to Davos and all the other conferences are proving this theory wrong, because we apparently do have the skills. It's not about the skills. But what I believe that we can attribute this to is the Dunning-Kruger effect, and which can be summed up best by a quote that I really like by Bertrand Russell, and he was like a mathematician and philosopher. And he wrote, the fundamental cause of trouble in the world is that the stupid are cocksure while the intelligence are full of doubt. Mm-hmm. So I'm wondering, do women really lack the entrepreneurial skills, or are we just suffering from, this Dunning-Kruger effect?
I don't think we lack entrepreneurial skills, because if you look how women raise their children, I find it phenomenal how some do that. And then when I see, how these children develop themselves, I really think, it really has to do with the whole system around it. And I think, and this is really something that I realized a couple of years ago, in the Netherlands, education, healthcare is paid for by the government. We pay, of course, our taxes for that, which I actually am happy to pay, because, there's some people who cannot take care of themselves and everything. But in America, you have to pay that everything yourself. So a woman right away, when she comes onto the job market, she knows that her money is needed. first for herself, but if she's married, for the children, everything, you can actually make that extra. And what I saw happening, Holland we are championing in part-time work. I think we're on the same level as Pakistan. And, but, if you work 3 days a week, which a lot of my friends did, because, they did not want to step out of the workforce having children, but they also were not able to step in 5 days a week. So they work for 3 days. But if that amount of money you earn goes to childcare, then you're like, well, you know
Why
what?
would I work?
Yeah. So
I know
we
that
were
very well.
The Dutch system was very much demotivating women.
Yeah.
And I am happy to see that some of my friends have actually gone back into the workforce, and also maybe not full time, but at least like 4 days. I think it makes them more interesting women as well, also more compassionate. They realize also, they are more connected to the changes of society. And what I'm seeing now is that, now being in my 50s, I feel that I can play a very important role for younger women aged 30, to help them navigate. Because it does, of course, intelligence is one thing, having passion and vision is another thing, but having your network and having access to funding and everything, that also, and I like to be the bridge between that, or at least be the maizena. When I actually organize these female leadership trips, I try to create like a natural matriarchy. So I try to have women from their 50s, 40s, and 30s. I see it happening now. One of our my last trip was to Silicon Valley, end of April, and we had a beautiful young woman, from one huge big technology company, and unfortunately, recently, she heard that she was made redundant, and I saw how that group just was like a warm bath around her, and I'm like, yeah, that sort of makes me teary-eyed because it makes me realize those 7 days that we spent together was more than just going and visiting all these companies, everything. Yeah. No, we actually made a love connection with each other. Village, yeah? And now we're helping each other. Yeah. And this is what I try to do. Yeah. What I do actually with these Hurry Up Club is that I go from event to event where climate is at stake, or healthcare, or climate finance. That's sort of the focus, and AI. So I go from Davos. Our next event is Change Now, 25th to 27th of March in Paris, where I'm actually going to be the master of ceremonies for the Women for Change. Yeah. We're going to be highlighting 25 women from all over the world, and also, again, in their 30s, 40s, and 50s. And then next thing is going to be the Cannes Lion, because, advertising is huge, because that's where the role models are being created. So a lot of these big corporations, they need to start showing that they're very much concerned with climate, but also how are they projecting women? How are they, accelerating female entrepreneurs within the companies, financing, you name it? How is AI impacting, the company, but also like their customer? Then we take a break in the summer. Then we prepare for UNGA, United Nations Climate Week, which is the 3rd week of September. We'll be very much active there. And then we prepare for COP29, which is in November in Azerbaijan and Baku. So we have 5 events where the Hurry Up Club comes together. And so the constitution of the group changes because not everyone is present at the same time. I basically try to be, like a source for them that they can retreat back to, and that they can revert back to, because sometimes they're there, representing their company, and once they've given a presentation, and then they're, on themselves. And so I try to be that sort of warm bath for them. And I organize these female leadership trips always with the Dutch embassy.
And how can they join you, like women who are watching this right now?
Well, if you go onto my LinkedIn page, you'll find the presentation there. And there's also an email address there, and you can ask for registration, and we will send you the information.
Perfect.
I would love to have you join. We have about a dreamer who does. I think I've been a big supporter of trying also to get as many women in politics as possible, because women don't want war. I mean, I heard last week on television that, if Trump wins, two things he's going to do right away. He's going to pull out of the Paris Agreement, but he's also most likely going to withdraw his support to the Ukraine war. So Europe is left to solve that, which means that a lot of Western young men will most likely be drafted to fight. Well, I know, I did not bear a son to be killed. I don't think any mother does around the world. No Russian mother, no Ukraine, no Israeli, no nobody. At least I cannot imagine. And I'm always, and this is where dream and action come together. And that's why I really think that we should get a woman in Dutch politics as a prime minister, because, and in every country, is because as the moment you get more women running, leading countries, they are not gonna send these countries to war. And a horrible thing is in America, and it's all over the world, but there's so much money being earned with guns. Look at the American Gun, Association, but also, with America, all the guns that there are from. I heard, leaked documents. This is something I heard when I was in Dubai in December, that leaked documents had showed from the NSA that America also created the proxy war. They are number one in creating proxy wars, to really impose their own democracy. Iraq, Syria, look at everything that happened in Latin America. So many more countries as well. But also, they were afraid that a lot of their gun, or like all their weapons, everything, that it was going to be outdated, so that they created this war with Ukraine, everything. Russia has always said, there's, don't push the limits, with NATO and everything. And America just kept on pushing those boundaries. I have a very conflicted relationship with the United States at the moment, to be quite honest, even though my son is studying there. I was educated there. But the sense of freedom and, that country used to stand for me, it doesn't anymore.
Is the Netherlands inspiring you more at the moment?
No, it's not the Netherlands at all. Of course, there are good things and bad things here, but I'm more inspired by the collective energy. I think every country has its unique talents. I think Dutch are like chameleons. And we get along with everyone in the world. I must say, it's very nice to be born in Amsterdam, because when you say, I come from the Netherlands, I had such a wonderful time there and everything. I've never had somebody said to me, I don't like your country. I can imagine, for you having your Russian origin, that it's much more difficult even, and now as well, especially now. I have so much respect for Navalny, in that sense. And I recently met his daughter at TEDWEN in Atlanta, who is, studying at Stanford, but she's also, his voice in the Western world. So courageous. Gives me chills again. I remember meeting her, looking into the eyes, and I saw her father in her eyes, and so courageous. And so, I am driven. I think I created the platform for the woman that I always wanted to be. And when a woman said to me, I want to be part of your platform. And I'm like, why? She says, I want to be woman of the world. I'm like, and I always say, you are already a woman of the world. I just help you become part of a global community. And then it gives you, and what's really nice about these female leadership trips? So this young woman who recently was laid off, and made redundant by her company, we had a evaluation, in September, October, the group. And then she said, what this trip gave me, she said, I learned to look at myself through a different lens, because the way of you presenting us to these companies, these various companies. Yeah. And that's exactly what I aim, because now she needs that different look at herself, because that company is no longer looking at her the way, she thought they did after 10 years. Yeah. And now she needs that extra support, because it all comes down to self-confidence. I really think it all comes down to self-confidence and resilience. How do you navigate the difficult moments when somebody, when a company says, well, we no longer need you, that can really push people into very deep depressions, or, especially
Absolutely.
So, but if you have a feeling of self-confidence somewhere, or you feel like, wow, there's a group there that supports me, that can make a huge difference for somebody.
Social support is so important in the social system, absolutely.
Well, I'm glad I'm able to share this because for me, the most important discussions actually were being held outside the forum, but those are usually also the most difficult ones. And one that I attended was on human trafficking and anti-slavery. And what blew my mind and really crushed my heart is what I heard is that at this moment, 50 million women and young girls, but also young men, are being held captive. Ooh. And when the Ukraine war happened and Russia, invaded Ukraine, and a lot of Ukrainian women and children fled to Poland. That was the first country where they went to they were in all these refugee camps. Within a day, all these human trafficking organizations, but they were like, sheep, they were actually wolves, clothed as sheep. And they were, saying, oh, come with us and we will take care of you. And these women have completely disappeared on the radar. And every country is aware of this because it's not only in there, but I mean, it's all over the world. So we need to collectively.
And where do they disappear to?
This is exactly, yeah. Countries. And I mean, it's the same. So during COVID, I was living in New York when COVID happened with my husband. And then we moved to our house in Costa Rica, which is where we spent on and off 2 years. And even there, right now, a lot of young women are disappearing and they don't know where they were disappearing to. Mm. And it's part of this global collective human trafficking. So somehow I'm being connected more now, maybe because I'm becoming more of a public figure and women feel that I can make an impact and I can. So thank you very much for offering me also this opportunity, to share my story, but also to raise this awareness. Because if you can make a difference on this, or you can actually, bring this to your local politicians or to your national politicians. I mean, we need to protect women and girls because, yes, I'm all for gender equality and equity, but physically we are unfortunately not as strong as men. And I think this is where we are being taken advantage of. Yes. It happened during COVID, even in my little village in Costa Rica, where young girls were being drugged, and they would go to a local cafe. And even though there were all these gap year programs and they were always educated and said, have a buddy, never go alone to the restroom and everything, sometimes it would happen and they were being drugged. I mean, women don't do that to men. No. That's really something that men do to women. Yeah. And so I'm also for raising awareness on this topic. I mean, I almost cried when I heard, the 50 million. I was like, that is so many people. And, even apparently there was a woman and she said, I've actually been in Switzerland. I'm always in that village and there's always upstairs on that first floor, the windows are always closed. And she said, I actually called the local police. I said, it doesn't feel right for me. And it turned out to be that there were like 12 women being kept. So it's not only in Poland, it also happens in Switzerland. Yeah. It happens all over the world.
Of course.
So that's a topic that I would like to raise awareness for. And I'm using Women of the World for that as well right now.
Thank you so much because this, I'm having goosebumps. My heart is overflowing with love for you, but also for your mission, but at the same time, tears for the sadness about the whole topic. In closing, we have a question for the next participant.
That's interesting because I didn't even think of that, but then usually things you didn't think about. What has been the highlight of your career?
We promised an answer to Ruth at the beginning of the show.
Hoe lang duurt het voor vrouwen net zo invloedrijk zijn, net zoveel te vertellen hebben als mannen?
I have a possible answer, and this is my theory, and it supports your Hurry Up Club. My theory is that it's in 20 years. According to Ray Kurzweil, who is a futurist, and he speaks of the following. He says, 20 years from now, the rate of change will be 4 times that which is today. So if you are 40 today, by the time you are 60, by today's standards, you will experience 1 year of change in just 3 months. If you are 10 today, by the time you're 60, you'll experience 1 year of change in 11 days. So we won't experience 100 years, but we will experience 20,000 years of progress in the 21st century alone. And adaptability, multitasking, resilience to change, these are the skills that are going to be paramount for the human race. And guess who's been known to multitask? Guess who's been known to be able and very resilient to change and to shift and adapt very quickly? Women. Great. Brilliant. Thank you so much. And thank you to the viewers for watching. Have a great week.
Thank you.